All right, so we will start off with the medications, antidepressants, and I'm going to provide the brand name as well as the generic name. You may not need to know both of them, but I just provide it so that you have more information and can be more informed within your decision when you're making it. So, Zoloft or citrulline, Cymbalta or Duloxetine, Effexor or venlafaxine, Wellbutrin or bupropion, trazodone or Dexeril, Seroquel or Quantapine, Celexa or Citalopram, Lexapro or Citalopram, or Prozac or Fluoxetine. And a way to remember these is if you've noticed a lot of the generic names have INE at the end of them. So if you see INE at the end of a medication on the exam and you know that the person's exhibiting depression symptoms, chances are we're looking at an antidepressant. And an easy way to remember the brand name, since they are a little more known, is come up with clever ways to remember them. Yet again, they're a little more likely that you'll be able to recognize them, or such as like Wellbutrin, it makes the person feel well again. Celexa, it helps you select your mood. Lexapro, when you take it, it makes you feel like a pro. Zoloft, it makes your mood go lofty. Stuff like that can help you remember them a little bit more along those lines. So that way, when you see it, it's like, oh yeah, this is a cool way to remember it. But again, oftentimes you're going to want to be able to associate the disorder with it. So that is what I will do as well. And again, it's not going to encompass every single diagnosis that you could possibly see it related to these medications, because one, I'm not a psychiatrist, and two, neurochemicals are kind of wonky. But let's stick to the social work jazz that we do. So stay in your lane and do what you do. So the first one, major depressive disorder, the person needs to have 5 or more of the symptoms, same 2-week period, and there needs to be a change in the functioning with at least one of the symptoms being met. So they have to have a depressed mood or loss of interest or getting less pleasure from things they used to enjoy. So if the person has one or both of those, can make the light go off in your head, this person might have depression. But again, in the same 2-week period, but the symptoms that we are going to be seeing can be depressed mood most of the day, nearly every day, as indicated by feelings of sadness, feeling empty, hopeless, or observations from others, such as someone being tearful, down, or isolating themselves. So if you see someone sad, if you see someone having hopelessness, or if you see someone having isolation or feeling down, again, huge indications of depression. Diminished interest or lack of pleasure in almost all activities, most of the day, nearly every day. So their pleasure or what they used to enjoy significantly decreases, as well as they are experiencing insomnia or hypersomnia nearly every day, meaning they're not getting enough sleep or they're sleeping too much. Their weight loss or their weight gain is within different realms. So it's within 5% of the person's body weight changing without trying to lose weight. Psychomotor agitation or retardation, or moving more quickly or more slowly than you normally would. So if someone's normally like upbeat and excited, they are now feeling down and drained. And there's fatigue or loss of energy nearly every day, or becoming more tired quicker than they normally would, and just not being able to do what they normally would without having other variables such as not eating as well as feeling tired. But those are also symptoms of depression as well. So if they're feeling worthless or excessive inappropriate guilt or remorse for things that they have done, so they're inwardly blaming themselves or beating themselves up in some way, shape, or form, and they're lacking concentration or motivation around completing tasks. So they're indecisive around all their tasks, or they're looking for others to make decisions for them so that way they are able to still function, but they don't have enough faith in themselves, or they keep doubting themselves to the fact that their decisions are important. So They tend to look to others, and they have recurrent thoughts of death, just not feeling like dying, but wanting to die. So they might have recurrent suicidal thoughts without plan, or serious suicide attempts with plans and means to do so. So there's that continuum. Someone just has thoughts of wanting to die, but not actually wanting to die. Someone has thoughts of wanting to die, but they don't have that specific plan, or they have thoughts of wanting to die. They have plans to do it, and they have the means to want to get it done. So the symptoms have a clinically significant impact on the person's function in the social, occupational, or other important areas of their life, meaning something that they once being able to do seamlessly or more effectively is now becoming more difficult, and they're not able to meet the same standard as they once did. And it's not attributable to like a physiological impact or substance use in any way, shape, or form. So that's why oftentimes on the exam, you'll have people say, look for medical and substance use first, because it can make you need that in that realm. And you always need to make sure that their medical or substance use aren't impacting or pseudo or coding over some mental health disorders or making it seem like they have those symptoms. It occurs better or not in coherence with schizoaffective, schizophrenia, schizophreniform, or some delusional type disorder, because again, within those diagnoses, there can be some depressive type symptoms or slowed symptomology, or there has not been a manic or hypomanic episode, because if it's depression accompanied by those, we're looking at bipolar disorder. So keeping those details in mind and making sure we're actually looking at just depression and not a mood disorder with both depression and mania or hypermania. Persistent is a depressive mood most of the day for more days than not, as indicated by either subjective accounts of the symptoms or observed from others. And the main difference between MDD and persistent is 2 years or more. So the best way to remember the depressive disorders is there's 2 of them, and it's either 2 weeks or 2 years. So there's a huge swing in it. And if we're dealing with children and adolescents, it's for 1 year. But depending on your setting, it's going to depend on the information that you need within it. So keep that in mind. But 2 depressive disorders, 2 weeks, 2 years, and then as a kid, it is 1. So kids, or half of what the adult is, so half of the time. So the symptoms that we're looking at are poor appetite or overeating, insomnia or hypersomnia, low energy or fatigue, low self-esteem, poor concentration or not being able to focus on things, feelings of hopelessness, and if you notice, same symptoms, just worded a little bit differently. So again, the main difference between the disorders is the length of time, and there's a huge swing. So during the 1 or 2 year period, depending on who we're talking to, again, 1 for children and adolescents, 2 years for adults, the disturbance has not been without criteria for more than 2 months. Again, since there's a 2 year period or longer, you can have stints where they're not depressed, but it cannot be longer than 2 months. And the criteria has not consistently been less than 2 years, because again, if it's less than, it's MDD or major depressive disorder, and the criteria for MDD can lead up to persistent, because major is something that is immediate, persistent is something that has been occurring over time. There's not been any manic or hypomanic episodes. Again, it would be bipolar disorder or cyclothymic, which is quickly cycling through mania or hypermania with little sense of depression. The disturbance is not better explained by persistent schizoaffective, schizophrenia, delusional disorder, or other schizophrenia spectrum type disorder. And the symptoms are not attributable, again, to the physiological effects of substance use or other medical conditions. Again, keep in mind, if you're using the acronym, medical and substance use in certain situations is a safety concern, but never generalize any of your answers based on that. The symptoms cause a clinically significant impact on social, occupational, or other important area functioning, because if it did not, there would not be a way to recognize that. there's a mental health, because if the person's still functioning and able to do everything, we would not be able to identify that. But moving on to anti-anxiety medications, and again, we broke it into brand name and generic. So with this, we look at Xanax or alprazolam, clonopine or clozapam, Valium or diazepam, Ativan or lorazepam, Buspar, which is MAOI, which stands for monoamine oxidase inhibitor, or again, it hits a different part of the brain than we would think normally. And then Librium or clozapazide. So I'm going to butcher those names quite a bit, but bear with me as we do it, because if you are able to recognize it and experiment with yourself, you'll notice it's a lot more difficult than you think. But easy ways to remember that is look at Lam or Pam at the end of them. And the little ditty that I always tell people to utilize to remember that is Pam needs anxiety meds to handle her Lam, because trying to take care of things can raise your anxiety a little bit. But again, when it comes to the brand names, they're a little more easy to visualize and look at and say like, oh yeah, I know what that one is. But again, if you want to keep little ditties for those as well, keep that in mind. But most times people struggle with the generic name and find it more difficult to recall them. And again, there's no guarantee what you'll see on your exam, so prepare for both. But again, each exam is so different that some people may not even get questions like that on the exam, but it's better to be prepared than to take it and then wish you would have been prepping that way. So disorders that could be associated with it. Again, this is not going to be exhaustive, but these are the ones that typically I recommend knowing. Generalized anxiety disorder. So someone has excessive worries for more days than not for longer than 6 months. You see GAD and instantly think of 6 months, because that is how long in general it takes for it to happen. So they have to have 3 or more of the following symptoms. A, restlessness or feelings of being on edge or ready to react at any given moment, which could be observed as hypervigilance. Being easily fatigued, again, doing not a lot of tasks and exhausting themselves pretty quickly, or they're doing the same task that they normally would be doing and they feel more tired than they normally do. Difficulty concentrating or thoughts moving in multiple directions. So it's kind of like a flight of idea, or like, oh my gosh, I'm worried about this and then this, and this can lead to this, such as when people are studying for their exams, they'll say, oh my God, if I don't pass, then I could lose my job. Or if I don't do this, then I cannot have to do this goal. And then they just rile themselves up and limit their ability to be able to focus and hone in on their abilities of being able to do what they normally would have been able to do without the worrying. Irritability or shouting at people. So when you worry about things, you tend to not be in the same mind frame as you would if you were calm. And some people exhibit their anxiety by expressing and processing with other people. Muscle tension, or just becoming easily sore after tasks that would have been normally mundane or pretty basic within your life. Sleep disturbance, not being able to sleep or having nightmares around certain various topics. And the anxiety or worry has a clinically significant impact on the person's life, again, in their social, occupational, and different areas of life. The disturbance is not better attributable to another mental health disorder, substance use, intoxication, withdrawal, or that medical piece within their situation. Which then leads us into our social anxiety disorder, which is a marked fear of anxiety about one or more social situation in which the individual is exposed to possible scrutiny by others. An example here, social interactions or having a conversation, meeting unfamiliar people, joining a study group to help pass your exam and you not knowing the process, being observed, like eating or drinking or anything along those lines that you might think, oh my God, they're looking at me, they're thinking I'm different than everyone else. Or performing in front of people, such as giving a speech during an ASWB study group, a lot of people, a lot of pressure, but still not like it's debilitating to you and you like worry to the capacity that you're not able to complete the task as you would have hoped to. So in like children, the anxiety must accompany in peer settings and not just during interactions with adults, because a lot of times kids don't have that exposure to people. So when they have that, it's like that stranger danger type mentality, like, oh my God, I can't be around this person, or is this person going to do something to me, etc. So the key emphasis is going to be on social. If you're not in a social setting, you're typically not going to have social anxiety disorder type symptoms. So the individual fears that he or she will be in an act in a manner that will be negatively evaluated by others, or perceive that it's going to be negatively evaluated by others. But they show the anxiety symptoms when they feel they can be negatively viewed as well. So it may be a situation where they're typically calm, but if someone makes an adverse reaction, like laughs at something, they may feel like they're getting laughed at, or someone's looking in your direction. You're like, yep, they're totally looking at me. They're judging me. I can't believe this. I should have never came. The social situation almost always provokes anxiety or fear. So it's almost a guarantee that anytime that you're in that social setting, it's going to rile you up and make you feel outside of yourself. But in children, it may be expressed by crying, tantrums, freezing, clinging to their caregiver more than they would otherwise, shrinking or falling to the ground, or failing to speak. So like almost becoming mute in the situation because they don't want to be causing any ruckus amongst them, or they don't want to be viewed as a bad child. The social situation is avoided or endured with intense fear. So like, let's say you wanted to study for your exam and then you know you don't do well in social situations, but you decided to join the study group anyway. And then you look up and say, holy crap, there are 88 people in here. Are they looking at me? Did I turn my camera off? Oh my gosh, should I ask a question? Should I not ask a question? What will people think of me? How many times have they failed their exam? What if I say I had failed it more than them? Are they going to view me differently? All of these thoughts may be rolling through some of your guys' head during this, but know that it oftentimes is just your anxiety speaking rather than the actual reality of what is going on. So the fear or anxiety is out of proportion of the actual threat posed by the social situation. Again, there is a lot of people in here, but most times when people share their experiences, it's a lot of support outflowing to that person and different suggestions and ways to help improve that person's situation. Because again, at the end of the day, we're all social workers, so we should all be building each other up in some way, shape, or form, or should be at least accepting of the person, regardless of what our thoughts on the situation are, and try to view people from their shoes rather than us just sitting in our shoes. And those that don't know, that is empathy. So having that sense of encouragement and supporting one another in likewise journeys. The fear, anxiety, or avoidance is persistent with at least 6 months or more. So anytime you're looking at an anxiety disorder, you're going to be looking at 6 months of time, except for panic disorder, which is strange with its a little shorter length of time. But keep in mind, most times you see 6 months, start thinking about anxiety, because that is going to be the go-to length of time for that type of disorder, which then we get into our mood stabilizers. And I have AP here because I have some antipsychotic medications as well in here because they can be utilized as well. So keep in mind that that is a possibility within that, and that you need to be prepared and aware that it could be there. So we can have lithium, Depakote, Lamictal, valproic acid, and this is where we get into our antipsychotics with our Haldol, our Spiridol, our Latuda, our Abilify, etc. And I'll get into the generic names of those later on, which are a little wonkier to say, but that's okay. We'll endure and get that through. But yeah, so there's no real way to be able to remember these because there's no trick. There's no theme amongst the disorders. So it's kind of like difficult for me to be like, yeah, here's a clever way to remember it. But if you notice, they kind of stand out a lot more with their inconsistency. So if you notice, like EX, the INE, which was again back into our antidepressants, but again, if you focus on the short list because it's shorter than most other diagnoses, it'll be a lot easier to remember what we're looking at in particular. But common disorders that we're going to be looking at here is bipolar 1 and bipolar 2. Again, not an exhaustive list, but oftentimes these are going to be one of our most heavy-hitting mood disorders on the list. So bipolar 1, and a key thing to keep in mind is you're most likely going to have mania when we're talking about bipolar 1, which I'll get into the difference between mania and hypomania a little later, but keep that in mind as we're going through this. So someone will experience a manic episode, which again is mania. So I guess I should be grammatically correct and say manic episode. But it's often accompanied by an episode of depression, but it does not require an episode of depression. Keep that in mind because hypomania and bipolar 2 require that episode of depression. And that's why I emphasize so heavy on that, because it's going to help you distinguish between the two. A manic episode is described as 3 or more of the following for at least a week or longer, 7 days, depending on which way you want to view it. So that is a big difference that you can indicate between the two is one is 7 days, one is not 7 days. So an inflated sense of self or grandiosity amongst it, decreased need for sleep lasting for only 3 hours or so. So it's like the person didn't sleep that much, but they feel like they got a boatload of sleep. It's like, man, I slept for like 10 hours and it's been 2 hours and they're getting up and doing a whole bunch of things. More talkative than normal, or they feel pressured to have communication with other people in their lives. So they may be in a social situation and they're like, it's too silent, I need to say something. So then they start a conversation and they just can't stop talking about what they're excited about or what they're trying to talk about. Or they have flight of idea, which leads back into them talking a ton about what they're interested in. They have a ton of ideas going through their mind and they're not able to slow them down, or they can't speak fast enough to relay all of the information to that person. So they may be talking about this DSM study group, and then they talk about a SEAL figuring that their girlfriend got them, and then they're like, oh, wow, yeah, steak is a very good meal. And then, oh, yeah, there's this thing on Friday that I'm going to, and oh, yeah, how's your mother? And then goes back to the DSM, and it's just like, dude, what are we talking about? And why are we talking about all of these at one time? And the person's like, oh my God, it's just really cool. And I got to tell you about all of this. And they're talking very, very fast. Again, that pressured speech type deal. Or they're distractible, meaning they find it difficult to stay on track, which could mold back into the flight of idea. They just have a ton of ideas going through their mind. They'll start one task, such as doing the dishes. They'll move to cooking dinner, and then they're back answering emails, and then they'll start cleaning their room, and then they forget they were doing dishes, and then they're like, oh my God, dinner's about to get burnt, and then they start talking to the friend on the phone, and then they go back to the emails, and then they're like, oh shoot, I never finished the dishes, and then etc. So they're distracted and have a ton of things going on. And there's an increase in goal-oriented activities. This is where they feel like they're working on goals and trying to accomplish a whole bunch of stuff in a little bit of time because they feel like they have the next idea and the hot idea in front of them rather than sitting down, focusing on one thing and accomplishing it at that time. They have excessive involvement and high potential for pain or negative consequences, spending a ton of money that they don't have, engaging in a lot of sex, whether they're using protection or not, it's kind of irrelevant, engaging in that behavior or putting themselves in dangerous situations to have sex with others, substance use or foolish business ideas. So like, oh my God, I have this business idea that I need $100,000 loan on. They take it out and then they don't even work on the business and then are stuck with the debt of the business and say, man, I'm totally going to get to that idea. I just have this other idea that I need to work on first. Again, doing way too many things at once and not being able to accomplish any of them. Symptoms have a clinically significant impact on the person's functioning, which often leads to hospitalizations, self-harm, homicidal ideations, suicidal attempts, etc., or just doing things that are excessively risky for themselves and putting themselves in a negative situation. And an easy way that I tell people to remember this is dig fast. So if you picture someone digging really, really fast, you'll think of bipolar disorder. And each one represents a different symptom. So D, distractibility. I, increased goal-oriented activity. G, grandiosity. F, flight of idea. A, activities that could be risky. S, sleep disturbance. And T, talkativeness or pressured speech, feeling like they have to talk to people. And again, it's pretty consistent with that, and that's just a cool little mnemonic to remember the symptoms. Hypomania, which is at least 4 days, is also an option for bipolar 1. But again, it's often mania because it has to have that clinically significant impact, and hypomania typically does not have that clinically significant impact on person's functioning. So let's look at it. Inflated sense of self-esteem or grandiosity, decreased need for sleep, feels rested after only 3 hours of sleep, more talkative than normal, or feels pressure to have conversations with people, flight of idea where thoughts will run through their head and they're not able to slow them down. And if you notice, these are mirrored of what mania symptoms are. It's just the impact that they have on someone's functioning. Distractibility, or they find it difficult to stay on task. Goal-oriented activities, again, they may start a whole bunch of things and not able to really finish them, or they may come up with a ton of ideas and they're just not able to sustain any of them either. They just come up with goals that are not attainable, and then they beat themselves up for not being able to accomplish them. We have excessive involvement in activities with high potential for pain or negative consequences. Again, spending money they do not have, engaging in a lot of sex or dangerous situations to have sex, substance use or obtaining substances and utilizing them when they're not in a hypomanic or manic episode. They would not utilize drugs or any substances, and they don't even really have the urge to be able to do it. And the person may also come up with business ideas, or they may have blackouts where they don't remember what exactly they're doing, but they continue to do it anyhow because that's what they feel is necessary for them and to them to be able to get their goals accomplished and do what they feel is necessary. And the key emphasis here, it does not have a clinically significant impact on the person's functioning. And after I describe bipolar 2, I'll make it a little easier and clearer how to distinguish between mania and hypomania, but sit back and we'll get it done a little quicker. So bipolar 2, again, it requires someone to have an episode of depression. So if you see depression followed by some like hyperactivity and all of these other symptoms, then the chances are you are going to have bipolar 2. But again, if it does not have a clinically significant impact on the person's life, we'd have that. So again, same symptoms, but I'll go through them again. Inflated sense of self-esteem or grandiosity, thinking that they are like the second coming, or they're superheroes, or that they're capable of doing anything that they set their mind to. Inflated sense of self and accomplishments. Decreased need for sleep, feels rested after only 3 hours of sleep, staying up days in a row, not being able to really consistently say or track when they've been sleeping, more talkative than normal, talking someone's ear off, or just talking about different things that don't even make entire sense, so tangential type speech. Flight of idea, which contributes again to their speaking and tangential thoughts or speech. Distractibility, doing a ton of things, or not being able to focus on one thing. Looks like the road runner and just ripping around, doing everything, or Ticker off of Winnie the Pooh, just bouncing around, just having a good old time and not noticing any of the consequences of their action. Increasing goal-oriented activities, again, coming up with a ton of ideas or working towards goals, and then before they complete them, stop, or they get super fixated on an idea, they complete it, and they all other areas of their life don't really matter. So like some asceticistic type thought process, which is a Freudian defense mechanism for delaying pleasure until you accomplish your goal. Excessive involvements in activities that could be potentially Painkiller have negative consequences, and again, does not have a clinically significant impact on the person's functioning. It does not require it, but it can have that. But again, if it has a clinically significant impact, we're often looking more at bipolar 1 disorder. So, like I said, I kind of alluded to it, but the difference between hypomania and mania is basically the impact it has on someone's life. So mania, we're looking at 1 week or longer. They often have a hospitalization or negative impact on their functioning. Key examples to remember here is like Britney Spears when she shaved her head, like dangled the baby over the balcony, and just did a whole bunch of erratic behavior. And you're like, holy cow, what the heck's going on here? Charlie Sheen, when he was talking about how he had tiger's blood and how he was better than everyone else and he was the best actor to ever touch the scene, again, very, very erratic behavior. They accomplished a lot in their life, but again, at what cost in the long run did it have on them? Hypomania, 4 days or more, and an easy way to remember the length of time is bipolar 2 is typically associated. 2 times 2 is 4, so it's 4 days. And bipolar 1, typically 1 week or longer, so take the 1, and bipolar 1 is 1 week or longer. Hypomania is 4 days, so bipolar 2 is often associated with that. 2 plus 2 is 4, so 4 days or more, and it does not have a clinically significant impact on someone's life. And an example of this is someone who is overproductive at work. They get fixated on task and are more productive with their time, or schedule their time out super duper far and often prioritize work and their achievements over social interaction or engaging with other people. They find it difficult to do one thing and always gets involved with multiple things, or they overcompensate by doing a ton of things and not doing them well. So they'll sign up for like 50 things and have zero chance of being able to complete them all, but they want to be able to say that they've done it, or they believe that they can handle it all on their own. So that is the main difference between the two, is just the length of time as well as the impact and details associated with them. So now we're going to get into our like ADHD medications, or again, attention medications. And the key emphasis or the shortcut here is kind of like feta or fiend. But before we get into that, let's look at the meds. So we have Adderall, which is an amphetamine combo or combination, Concerta, methylphenidate, Ritalin, methylphenidate as well, which is a different formula. Vyvanse is lisdexamfetamine. And if you notice, the easiest way to have this is feta or fiend. So amphetamine, fiend, and feta. So the easiest way to tell it is people fiend for their feta cheese, and when they don't have it, they get distracted because in the inside of it, that's what we're looking at. So again, if you want to create cool ways to remember the brand names, but they're often names that we've heard of or often are comfortable with being able to memorize. So that's up to you with your decision. Most people struggle with the generic name. So that's where I have to really provide like a cool little way to remember. But that is how we'd look at that. And the most common disorders associated with it, again, ADHD. So ADHD medications, often ADHD, or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. There's 2 types. There's inattention and then hyperactivity. So inattention requires 6 or more symptoms for someone up to the age of 16 years old, or 5 or more for someone of 17 or older. So the amount of symptoms that it requires goes down as someone gets older. So they have to be present for at least 6 months and inappropriate for their developmental age. So let's peel back the 9 symptoms, and keep in mind we had to have 6 for someone 16 and younger and 5 for 17 and older. So they often fail to give close attention to detail or make careless mistakes in schoolwork, at work, or in other activities that they engage in. They often have trouble holding attention during task or playing activities. They often are like trying to focus and then they're off doing something else. It seems like they're not listening to rules because they get lost when there's too much details thrown at them at one time. It doesn't seem like they listen to others when they're spoken to because, again, they get lost on details and find it very, very difficult to keep it all together. They have difficulty with organization or organizing tasks and activities within their daily life. Trying to organize something is very, very painful for this person because, again, not able to keep eye on detail. So they're not able to organize things very well. Often avoid things they dislike or are reluctant to do tasks that require a lot of mental effort over a long period of time. Schoolwork, work, household chores, reading a book, etc. They often lose things necessary for tasks and activities. School supplies, pencils, papers, homeworks, house keys, instructions, chargers, pieces of mail, important documents, etc. They often get distracted by things around them very, very easily. So anything that could pull their attention, they're away from the activity that they should be doing. They often forget things to do in their daily activities. Like if they had to take something out of the fridge for dinner, they're not even really thinking about it until they're away from the task and like, holy cow, I forgot this. And then they start freaking out about it. But that is where inattention, they're able to keep their attention on anything for very long periods of time. Hyperactivity and impulsivity is the next component of ADHD. So again, it's going to be pretty consistent with 6 or more for anyone that's 16 or younger, and then 5 or more for 17 or older. Hyperactivity must be, again, 6 months or longer. So it's going to be very consistent with an attention type, just very, very different symptomology when we're looking at it. And it's going to cause an impact that is, again, beyond their developmental level or inappropriate for what they should be doing at that given age. So with 9 symptoms, first symptom, they often fidget or tap their hands, feet, or simply squirm in their seat when it's inappropriate. You're supposed to be quiet, supposed to be doing something. They're just tapping, fidgeting, and roaming around. They often leave their seats in situations when remaining in the seat is expected. They may get up, start talking to their friends. They might walk around the room, and it's like, dude, we're supposed to be doing this activity, and they're just, mind is on 100. They often run about or climb on things in situations where it's not appropriate. And if you're an adolescent or adult, it might just be you're restless, not able to sit still, fidgeting with your hat, fidgeting with pens, fidgeting with your phone, etc. when other people are just able to sit still and relax. Are unable to play or take part in leisure activities quietly, or they bounce from task to task. They're going to be, again, kind of similar to mania, but they might be cooking dinner and then they would start answering emails, or then they get on their phone, start playing a game for like 3 hours and they're like, where'd the time go? It seems like they're on the go or acting as if they're driven by a motor because they're just going 100% of the time, just like, I need to be doing something. Oh my God, there's this thing over here I want to be doing. Oh my God, there's this thing here. Look at that, look at that, look at that. And it's just, they're on 100% of the time. They talk excessively or without much direction. If they get super excited about an activity, you might hear about one thing they're super duper excited about, but then they're like so on 100, they start talking about something totally different midway through. So this kind of mimics mania in a lot of ways. They're blurred out answers even before the question is finished. They're not able to wait their turn, so they're just bored with the activities very quickly. So they're like, why are we still on this question? We need to be on the next one already. We have the answer. And then 8, trouble waiting for their turn or in line. They just get very restless and very fidgety and feel like they have to be somewhere else when they're entirely fine being with where they're at. Or they'll interrupt or intrude on people's conversation, games, or anything that they feel they're being left out on. They're going to insert themselves anyway. So in addition to the symptoms that were described, the 9 and 9, several inattention or hyperactivities were present before the age of 12. And that's the key thing, is it has to be before the age of 12, but not all of them. but the majority have to be before the age of 12. If not, we're looking more in the mania spectrum or other disorders. They need to be present in 2 or more settings. So they must be exhibiting the same thing at home as they are at school or with their friends and relatives or doing something else. So if it's only observed in one environment, it's very, very difficult to be able to observe it and be able to diagnose this effectively. There's clear evidence that the symptoms interfere or reduce the quality of the person's life. And again, multiple areas, typically 2 or more. And the symptoms are not better explained by another mental health disorder, such as a mood disorder, bipolar mania, anxiety disorder, or like trauma-related dissociative type disorder, which again ties into more of our trauma or personality disorder if they're in the adult realm. Again, those are 18 or older. The symptoms will not happen as a result of a psychotic or schizophrenia episode. Again, they're not everywhere based on delusions or anything like that. And there are 3 kinds of presentations ADHD can have. There's that combined, which there's enough symptoms for both inattention and hyperactivity impulsive. And again, 6 months is the diagnosing time, predominantly inattention and then predominantly hyperactivity. And enough criteria is met for either one of them lasting for more than 6 months. And there's more symptoms for one rather than both. So then we'll move into our antipsychotic disorders and AP for short. So I kind of planted that seed early on, but let's look at them. So we have Haldol, Haldopteridol, Vraylar or Crazoprazine, Risperidol or Risperidone, Thorazine or Chlorpromazine, Invega or Paliperidone, Duodine, Ziprazidone, Clozaril or Clozapine, or Abilify or Rapirozole. So an easy way to remember these is Done is in the majority of them, because when you take them, you'll be entirely done. And it's not in all of them, but in a good majority of them. And you're going to notice there's the INE as well, but the ones that have the INE sound a little more intense than the ones that we had for our antidepressants. So keep in mind, these are going to be there to combat hallucinations, delusions, aggressive behaviors, etc. And again, you can come up with clever names to remember the brain name, but oftentimes when you see them, you'll be able to recall them and remember them. So the most common disorders we're going to have is the schizophrenia spectrum, and that is what I'm exactly going to cover now. So we're going to start at the very bottom of the pillar, which is brief psychotic disorder, which is a thought pattern disorder in which one person will experience short-term gross motor deficits in reality testing manifested by at least one, and they must be 1, 2, and or 3. 1 is delusions, 2 is hallucinations, or 3, disorganized speech. So delusions are false beliefs that are not based in reality and that the person refuses to give up, even when presented with factual information. Again, delusions, they're not entirely correlated with anything, and they're coming off of just spite of what they think. Hallucinations, we're going to see auditory or hearing, visual, which is seeing, tactile, or what they're feeling, something that is not actually there, olfactory or smelling, things that are not actually there. They are perceiving that they are. And disorganized speech is going to be incoherent or irrational content or very peculiar things that you would be like, wow, why is this person actually thinking about this? And then keep in mind brief, because the length of time is going to be less than 30 days. But we'll get into that a little later. Just I wanted to plant that seed now. So with disorganized speech, someone can be tangential or speaking about multiple topics that do not align or blend together. The theme of speech is not entirely connected, or things that the person are saying are not entirely realistic. Again, very peculiar or eccentric type topics. And you're going to say, wow, why is this person talking about different Bible verses related to one another and how it's going to lead to them being a prophet, etc. Anything along those lines, or super duper fixation on things such as astrology. You're going to hear people talking about how they talk to the people in the government, or how they're getting special messages from like YouTube clips and stuff like that. Again, very, very tangential type things or eccentric where you're like, oh, okay, when did this like start? Again, understanding the situation. In disorganized or catatonic behavior, so this is going to be our repetitive or senseless movements or adopt in a pose which may be maintained for hours at a time. Catatonia is just being so depressed that your body slows itself down, and they may be resistant to efforts to move them in a different position or will assume the new position for hours as well if they are moved. And symptoms are not better explained by a depressive disorder with psychotic features or bipolar disorder with psychotic features. Again, the difference between the two is that you wouldn't really have consistent hallucinations, delusions, and disorganized speech. They'd be speech trickled in at particular times, and mania would have that, well, bipolar would have that mania or hypomania mixed in. And then it's not better attributable by schizophrenia, and the difference here would be the length of time. Or again, no substances were used. So if someone's intoxicated on crack cocaine or methamphetamine, they could have that delusional type thinking or hallucinations amongst them, or if they're withdrawing from particular substances as well. That is something you should keep in mind. And again, brief is going to be less than 30 days because that's a brief amount of time. Schizophrenia form, I always tell people to think of the pre-form. So like the pre-form of schizophrenia. Why? Because it becomes before it, but it's going to have a lot of symptoms that are related to schizophrenia. So they have to have at least 2 of the following symptoms within a 1 month period, yet less than 6 months. So symptoms 1 to 4 are considered positive symptoms, and symptoms 5 to 8 are considered negative. And I always say positive because think of something that's super positive and charged up. They're excited. Their mind is going everywhere. So these are going to be our delusions, hallucinations, disorganized speech, and grossly disorganized kind of catatonic type movements. So that is where we're going to look at. Again, delusions or false beliefs that are not based in reality and that the person refuses to get up, even when presented with factual information. Again, if you've noticed, that's the same and similar symptom that we had prior. Hallucinations, auditory, visual, tactile, olfactory. Hallucinations, disorganized speech, so they're saying things that don't make sense. They're saying made up words that have no meaning, or tangential speech where the person skips from topic to topic with no particular themes. And it doesn't entirely make sense. Or they might start mumbling and you're like, I don't really hear you. And then just keep going and saying words and tones that you don't entirely know. And you say, okay, that's pretty strange how that just went from conversation to you just mumbling to yourself. And grossly disorganized or catatonic behavior, again, these are going to be a repetitive emotionless actions, whether it's pacing, whether it's like rocking, whether it's like fidgeting amongst themselves, adopting a new pose which would maintain for hours, may resist efforts to move them. And like I said, pacing, they're walking in circles. They may write constantly or look around like, oh my gosh, what the heck's going on around me? Or people are spying on me type deal. Repeated movements with no rhyme or reason. They might just start tip tapping like a beat, and then they might like start moving their face and like might start like moving around or like start like dancing in erotic ways. And then they're going to have their lack of energy or like huge crashes from like super duper highs to super duper lows. They're going to have poor hygiene or they lack grooming, meaning they were once well maintained and then they'll like go to like not showering, not trimming like their hair and stuff like that, or like cleaning their body or like trimming their nails, etc. Loss of interest in things they would have enjoyed. So like they were super duper excited about something, they invested a ton into it, and then they just like crash and think that there's no point in living, there's no point in even moving on, like their purpose is gone. They start withdrawing from their family, friends, and social activities. They stop engaging more, and then they just like pull back because they just either one, feel like people are out to get them, or two, they don't feel that they have the energy to engage with people or that they wouldn't be able to fit in. So schizoaffective and bipolar disorder have been ruled out because either one, no major depressive or manic episodes concurrently, with the active phase of the symptoms, or 2, if mood episodes have occurred during the active phases, they have been present for a minority of the total duration of time. So you can have trickles of like super energized, but again, a lot of these mental health disorders can look similar to one another, but parsing it out and giving it the length of time and the amount of energy within analyzing them could be very, very helpful. The disturbance is not attributable to, again, the effects of substance use, a medical condition, anything along those lines. And the length of time, again, is going to be in between 1 month, but less than 6 months. So if you think about it, brief 30 days or less. So that comes first because it's brief. Preform, so it's in between brief psychotic disorder and schizophrenia being 6 months or longer. So it's the preform, but is the second version. So schizophrenia is going to be at least 2 of the following symptoms for 6 months or longer. So anytime we see 6 months or longer, that is where we're going to start doing schizophrenia diagnosing. And again, symptoms 1 to 4 are considered positive symptoms. Again, think of high energy, or the mind is going very, very quickly, or like a ball of energy. Symptoms 5 to 8 considered negative symptoms. Think of a negative person. They're low energy or not progressing in any way, shape, or form, or think of just a negative cloud. So same symptoms as the prior, but I'll say them again. Delusions, false beliefs that are not based in reality. The person refuses to get up even when presented with factual information. Hallucinations, so we're looking at our auditory, our visual, our tactile, our olfactory. And it is all things that are not actually there, or things that were not previously there, and then they're still thinking that they are there. And then disorganized speech, saying things that are kind of made up, things that aren't actually there. They don't make sense. They're jumping topic to topic. Getting back into our gross disorganized or catatonic behavior. We're looking at repetitive or senseless movements. Again, adopting a pose for hours. When they're moved, they're adopting that new pose, or they're resisting someone moving them because they don't feel like they need to progress or be moved. Pacing, walking into circles, writing constantly, or writing like they're disorganized or hallucination or delusions down on paper. Repetitive move with no rhyme or reason. We then move into our negative symptoms of lack of energy, poor hygiene or lack of grooming. We have the loss of interest in things they would have enjoyed, that withdrawal from families again. In the significant portion of the time since the onset of the disturbance, there's one or more of their areas of life that have been negatively impacted, such as their work, interpersonal relations. Self-care has been below the level it was prior to the onset of symptoms. Schizoaffective or bipolar were ruled out. Again, there were no depressive episodes or manic episodes concurrently happening, or the mood episodes have occurred during active phases of symptoms. They've been present for the minority of the duration, and the disturbance is not attributable to physiological effects of substances or other medical conditions within those. Question 1. A social worker at an outpatient clinic is completing an intake assessment with a 35-year-old male who reports finding it difficult to handle all the responsibilities in his life. The man reports he has been working at his current job for 5 years, and he always feels like he is going to be fired. The man reported he often feels the urge to hurt people, and that when he is not at work, he will lock himself in the house to prevent himself from acting on his thoughts. The man reports he was previously hospitalized 1 year ago due to experiencing feelings of hopelessness. What is the most likely medication to improve the man's situation? A, Clozaril, B, Valium, C, Depakote, D, Celexa. When you have your answer, type the word happy into the chat. Opening the polls. Thirty more seconds. Closing the polls. So the majority think it is C. Second place is D. Third place is A. Fourth place is B. Let's look at it. So, social worker, outpatient clinic, intake assessment, first time seeing this guy. 35-year-old, difficulty maintaining responsibilities in his life. He's been working at the job for 5 years and feels like he's going to be fired. So he's been feeling that way for 5 years at a time. Man reports he will feel urges to hurt people, and when he's at work, he will lock himself in the house to prevent acting on his thoughts. So he has some type of aggression as well as possibly some paranoia. The man reports he was previously hospitalized 1 year ago and due to experiencing hopelessness. So some type of emptiness, maybe some catatonic behavior. A, clozaril, which is going to be anti-psychotic. Volume, anxiety med. Depakote, mood stabilizer. And then Celexa, depression med. So quick review, we're going to see outpatient clinic, intake assessment, difficulty maintaining responsibilities, been in a job for 5 years, paranoid he's going to get fired, urges to hurt people, so maybe some like delusions, and he'll lock himself in the house to prevent himself from acting on this. So he has some type of recognition, but knows that he does have some erratic thoughts. He was hospitalized for 1 year and he was feeling hopeless. So some type of downswing in his behavior. So we'll start off by taking away anxiety because yes, he does have anxiety symptoms. It's not entirely all anxiety based. He does have some deeper stuff that is regulated more into some mood disorder, maybe antipsychotic. And it's not just depression. Yes, he did have some hopelessness, but it was interswung with some exaggerated anger towards people as well as paranoia about being fired and trying to hurt people, and was hospitalized. So is it going to be a mood disorder or is he going to have some antipsychotic needs here? So we're going to eliminate some mood stabilizer because it doesn't sound like he has any manic type symptoms here. He's more about on the antipsychotic realm of feeling like he's going to lose his job. He's feeling like he needs to hurt people. He's isolating himself away, and he's having those catatonic type episodes of being able to lock himself in the house and feeling hopeless. So we would look at more of a clozaril type response here. So that is how we would look at that answer in particular. Question 2. An emergency department social worker is completing an intake assessment of the 40-year-old female who reports feeling like nothing will ever get better. The woman reports that she is finding it difficult to keep her thoughts straight and that there's not enough time in the day to accomplish everything she would like to. The woman reports she has been avoiding her friends since she feels like they're going to make fun of her or hurt her in some way. The woman reports having nightmares and constantly worrying about everything. Which medication is the doctor most likely going to prescribe the woman? A. Clozaril. B. Xanax. C. Wellbutrin. D. Depakote. And when you have your answer, type the word talented into the chat. Opening the polls. Thirty more seconds. Closing the polls. The majority think it is B. Second place is C. Third is D. Fourth is A. Let's look at it. So we're in an emergency department, completing an intake assessment. So first time, 40-year-old female. Reports feeling like nothing will ever get better, some type of hopelessness. Reports she has been finding it difficult to keep her mind straight, so some flight of idea type symptoms. Not enough time in the day to accomplish everything that she would like to. So feeling on edge. She's been avoiding her friends since she feels like they're going to make fun of her in some way. So maybe some anxiety. And one reports having nightmares and constantly worried about everything. So there's some sleep disturbances as well as constant thoughts of worry. Which medication? So Clozaril is going to be that antipsychotic med. And then Xanax is going to be anxiety. Wellbutrin is going to be depression. Depakote, mood stabilizer. So, quick review. Emergency department social worker, intake, 40-year-old female, Nothing's going to get better. Not keeping our mind straight. Not enough time in the day, so kind of feeling on edge. Avoiding friends, so kind of isolating, but for the sole purpose that she feels she's going to be made fun of. Again, some anxiety. Nightmare, so there's some sleep disturbances, and then there's a constant worry about multiple things going on in her life. So we're going to rule out Wellbutrin because there's no depression instances in here. Yes, we do have sleep disturbances. We do have lack of concentration, and we do have some hopelessness, but it goes a little bit deeper than that. So then we're going to look at, is there instances of mania and then instances of depression or hospitalizations at that. So the symptoms were hopelessness, flight of idea, not enough time, anxiety, sleep disturbances, and constant worry, which could lead us in. But at this time, we're going to not do Depakote. Why? Because we have to keep in mind where we're at. We're at an emergency department. Depakote's more of a long-term med, as well as often takes more monitoring and times. So this is going to be something whether stabilized for the moment, as well as it's not entirely instances of mania and fluctuations of depression or clinically significant impact within that. So we have to keep in mind where we're at and what symptoms we're actually looking at and parsing through. So do we feel like this person is psychotic or having delusions in some way, shape, or form? Or do we feel like they're having excessive anxiety to the fact where it is daunting on their ability to function? So parsing through the details again, nothing's getting better. So some hopelessness, worrying about multiple things and not being able to keep her mind straight based on that, not accomplishing everything she wants, so high expectations and irritability in her life, isolation or avoiding people because she feels like they're going to get made fun of or they're going to hurt her in some way, sleep disturbances, and then constantly worrying about everything. So with that, we're going to rule out Clozaril because there's no hallucinations, delusions, catatonic behavior, disorganized thinking, or anything like that. So we are going to go to our heavy hitting Xanax. So that is how we look at that question in particular. And that's where we have to be very, very careful when looking at symptoms of what we're seeing and how we're viewing them. So when parsing through these are how you would do it. And again, I just didn't want to do, here's this diagnosis, here's how you would actually choose the med. I wanted you to be able to navigate through different symptoms and be able to pick out what you think. So question 3. Social worker at a community mental health agency is meeting with a 28-year-old male upon discharge from a hospital for a suicide attempt. The man reports feeling like regardless of what he does, that he will never be good enough. The man reports his mother recently died and that his girlfriend broke up with him last month. The man reports utilizing alcohol to cope with all his stressors. The man would like to find ways to improve his mood and to stop losing everything. What medication would best supplement his treatment? A, Wellbutrin, B, Ativan, C, Haldol, D, Adderall. And when you have your answer, type the word sorry into the chat. Opening the polls. 30 more seconds. Slapping the poll shut. The majority think it is A. Second place is C. Third is B. Fourth is D. So, social worker, community mental health agency. 28-year-old male upon discharge from a hospital for a suicide attempt. So, regardless of what he does, he is feeling inadequate in his situation. He reports his mother recently died and his girlfriend broke up with him last month. Anytime we have a length of time in the question, jump on it. And the man reports utilizing alcohol to cope with his stressors. The man would like to find ways to improve and stop losing everything. So some worry on his end, as well as wanting to improve his behavior. Wellbutrin, we are looking at depression. Ativan, we are looking at anxiety. Haldol, we are looking at an antipsychotic. And then Adderall, we are looking at ADHD or attention medication. So, quick review. CMH facility, 28-year-old male, hospital discharge, suicide attempt, hopelessness, loss in his life last month, utilizing substances to cope, and he wants to improve his mood and stop losing everything. So, we're not going to be doing Adderall because this guy's not trying to gain focus or having any inattention or hyperactivity. He experienced a suicide attempt as well as is feeling inadequate, hopeless, and kind of isolating himself and utilizing substances to cope. We're not going to do Haldol because, yes, he had a suicide attempt, but he's not psychotic in any way, shape, or form. He's just coping with grief and as well as trying to improve himself after such a huge blow in his life. So, is it anxiety we're looking at, or is this guy depressed or experiencing depression? So, quick review again: suicide attempt, which aligns with more or less our depression or major depressive disorder. Diagnostic with suicidal attempt, suicidal ideation with plans without means, etc. Not feeling good enough, so some type of inadequacy or low self-esteem or hopelessness as well as experience loss, and he's coping with substances. So it's not going to be anxiety that we're looking at here. We're looking at Wellbutrin and depression medication. So that is how we would look at that question in particular. Question 4. A social worker at a family agency is meeting with a father and his 8-year-old son who has been having issues in school. The father reports that his son's teacher has told him that the boy finds it difficult to complete his work and will often interrupt others while speaking. The boy reports that he finds school boring, that he just wants to spend time with his friends. The father would like his son to attend a psychiatric appointment. What medication is most likely to be prescribed to the boy? A. Ritalin. B. Buspar. C. Wellbutrin. D. Abilify. When you have your answer, type the word flash into the chat. Opening the polls. 30 more seconds. Closing down the polls. The majority think it is A. Second place is D. No one touched B or C. Let's look at it. Social worker, family agency, meeting with the father and 8-year-old son. Son is having behavioral issues. In school, father reports his son's teacher told him about the boy having difficulty completing his work, and he will often interrupt others while speaking and always emphasize on who is telling us the information. And the boy reports, so the boy is telling us he finds school boring and just wants to spend time with his friends. The father would like the son to attend a psychiatric appointment. A. Ritalin, ADHD/attention medication. Boost bar, anxiety, Wellbutrin, depression, Abilify, mood stabilizer. So, quick review: family agency, meeting with the father and 8-year-old son. Son's having issues while at school. And then the teacher says that he's finding it difficult to complete work and that he's interrupting others while speaking. And he says school is boring. I just want to spend time with my friends. Why not let me have a life, y'all? So let's investigate here. Kid's not experiencing anxiety, and we have to keep in mind, how old is this young lad? 8 years old, and he's our client. So there's no depression cited, so that's why no one picked B or C. So is this kid having ADHD type symptoms or inattention type symptoms and hyperactivity? Or are they having a mood disorder? So at 8 years old, we're going to give the benefit and say that he's not having mania or depression and that he's just having ADHD type symptoms or just finding it very difficult to focus. So that's how we look at that one. And we always want to keep in mind the age as well as who our client is when we are answering these questions. So let's look at question number 5. A. Social worker in an outpatient setting is completing an intake assessment with a 35-year-old male who reports feeling like his friends are out to get him. The man reports that he has not been sleeping well for the past 8 days and it feels like his mind will not shut off. The man reported spending money he does not have, and he feels pressured to engage in conversation with everyone he meets. Client reports having a history of hospitalization, that he's been arrested for getting into fights with people. What medication would best treat the client's symptoms? A. Abilify, B. Invega, C. Xanax, D. Zoloft. And when you have your answer, type the word scroll into the chat. Opening the polls. 30 more seconds. Closing the polls. The majority think it is A. Second place is B. Third is C. Fourth is D. Let's look at it. Social worker, outpatient setting, intake, 35-year-old male. His friends are out to get him. The man reports he has not been sleeping well for the past 8 days. And again, any length of time, we need to grab onto it. Feels like his mind will not shut off, so we have some flight of idea amongst us. And the man reported spending money that he does not have, so some impulsive type behavior. And he feels pressured to engage in conversation with people that he meets, some talkativeness, having a history of hospitalization, and has been arrested for fights with people. So, again, engagement and behaviors that could be risky. Abilify, we're going to be looking at a mood stabilizer, as well as antipsychotic. So again, that is one of our hybrids. So it could do both. Invega is going to be antipsychotic. Xanax, anxiety. Zoloft is going to be depression. Quick review, outpatient, intake, 35-year-old male. Friends are out to get him. Not sleeping well for the past 8 days. Mind's not shutting off. Spending money he doesn't have. Feels like he needs to talk to everyone. History of hospitalization and arrest and throwing bows with people. So we're going to rule out anxiety because he, yes, has a lot of flight of ID and a lot of things on his mind, but it's a little deeper than that. We're going to rule out depression because, yes, he is feeling kind of low at periods of time, but not entirely depression. It is coupled with something. So is this guy exhibiting a psychotic disorder, or is he exhibiting a mood disorder? So let's look at it. Feeling like his friends are out to get him. So that's kind of like some paranoia or things like that. 8 days. That reminds us of diagnostic time for mania. 7 days or longer. His mind's not shutting off, so we have some flight of idea. Spending money, so engaging in behaviors that could be risky or negative impacts on them. Pressured speech. Hospitalization, so there's a negative impact on the person's life. So we're going to rule out our psychotic disorder because there's only one criteria, such as the paranoia, but the other ones point to our manic episode or bipolar 1 disorder. So Abilify is the answer. Question 6. A social worker at an outpatient clinic is working with a 38-year-old female who reports having difficulty sleeping for the past 2 weeks. The woman reports she has been getting a lot of ideas of what she can do in her life and that she cannot keep up with them all. The woman reports that she has spent all of her money on materials to advance her life and is now at risk for losing her house. The client has been hospitalized and denies ever being on medications. What is the most likely diagnosis for this client? A, bipolar 1 disorder. B, bipolar 2 disorder. C, generalized anxiety disorder. D, schizophrenia form. When you have your answer, type one thing that you're looking forward to next week. Opening the polls. Thirty more seconds. Slapping the polls shut. The majority think it is A. Second place is B. Third is C. Fourth place is D. So let's look at it. Social worker, outpatient clinic. We're going to look at the 38-year-old female. Reports having difficulty sleeping for the past 2 weeks. The woman reports that she has been getting a lot of ideas, but she can't keep up with all of them. The woman reports she spent all of her money and is now at risk for losing her house. So, key emphasis on losing her house. So, there is some clinically significant impact on functioning. She's never been hospitalized and never has been on meds. So, let's get into it. So, bipolar 1 disorder is mania, which again, 7 days or longer. Well, yeah, 7 days or longer. Does not require an episode of depression and requires a significantly impact on the life. And then if we want to do hypomania as well, which is again 4 days or longer. And then we're going to be looking at bipolar 2 disorder, which is hypomania, 4 days or longer. And remember, the easy strategy is 2 plus 2 is 4, because that's how long it takes. And then it requires an episode of depression and does not require a clinically significant impact on their life. Generalized anxiety disorder, 6 months or longer. Schizophrenia form is longer than 1 month, but less than 6 months. Quick review. Outpatient clinic, 30-year-old female. 2 weeks is the length of time we are looking at here. She reports she's getting a lot of ideas, so flight of idea. She reports having spent all of her money engaging in behaviors that put her negative consequences or risky. At risk of losing house, clinically significant impact, not hospitalized, not on meds, but still, nonetheless, situations a little steep. So we will automatically rule out schizophrenia form because there's no delusions, no hallucinations, no disorganized speech or catatonic behavior. Not generalized anxiety disorder. Yes, she's having a lot of things go through her mind and she's worried about a lot of things, but it's a little deeper than that and not as simple as anxiety. So it's either bipolar 1 or bipolar 2. So the length of time is 2 weeks or more, which both of them fall in there, 7 days or longer or 4 days or longer. So it does not really have any episodes of depression in the stem. So, and there's a clinically significant impact. So we will rule out bipolar 2 disorder and we will jump on bipolar 1 disorder with mania because she's having sleep disturbances, flight of idea, engagement in behaviors that could become risky, goal-oriented activity increase, as well as clinically significant impact on functioning. That is how we would look at that question in particular. Question 7. A social worker at a community mental health clinic is meeting with a mother and her 9-year-old son who's having behavioral issues at school for the past 6 months. The mother reports that her son has been sent home multiple times for pushing other children while waiting in lines, will run around the classroom when completed with his work, and interrupt other people while they are talking. The child reports that, that he does not like other people and feels like they are too slow and it is stay out of his way. What diagnosis best explains the boy's behavior? A. Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. B. Disruptive mood dysregulation disorder. C. Conduct disorder. D. Oppositional defiant disorder. When you have your answer, type one thing that you're grateful for in your life right now. Opening the polls. Thirty more seconds. Closing down the polls. The majority think it is A. Second place is B. Third is C. Fourth is D. Let's look at it. Social worker, community mental health clinic, meeting with a mother and 9-year-old son. Behavioral issues for the past 6 months. The mother reports that her son has been sent home multiple times, pushing other children while in lines, running around classroom when completed, interrupt people while chit-chatting. The child reports he does not like people and feels like they're too slow and need to get out of his Speedy Gonzalez way. So, A, ADHD is lack of patience, not being able to sit still, and will leave seat when it is inappropriate. Disruptive mood dysregulation disorder. Child has tempers and anger throughout the day and last the majority of the day. Conduct disorder is when the child will do deviant acts towards others as well as break the societal norms or legal expectations, meaning breaking the law. Oppositional defiant disorder. Child will be defiant towards people of authority. Quick review. Community mental health clinic. Mom and 9-year-old son. Son's having behavioral issues at school. Past 6 months. Mom reports her son was sent home multiple times. He's pushing kids. He's running. And he's interrupting others. The child does not like other people and feels like they are too slow. So we're going to rule out oppositional defiant disorder because he's not listening to the rules, but it's not because he doesn't really care about authority, because he's able to have rules and expectations around him. He just does not like being around other people, and he wants to get what he wants to get done. He's not defying the rules for the sake of defying rules or not telling the authority that he does not want to listen. It's also not exhibiting conduct disorder because he's not breaking the rules. He's not stealing from people. He's not hurting people maliciously. He's not cussing at people. He's not angry at anyone. He just simply is pushing other kids because he can't wait in lines, because he doesn't have patience. He's running around the classroom because he's bored and wants to do other things, and he's like a motor, and he's interrupting people because he can't wait for his turn. And with that, again, he's not really angry throughout his day or the entirety of his day. He's simply hyperactivity mode of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. So that's how we would look at that question in particular. 8, and final question. A 21-year-old client has been working with a social worker at a community mental health clinic for the past 5 months. The client reports hearing voices that tell him to hurt his parents and that they have caused him to isolate from social situations. The client reports finding it difficult to sleep and that he feels like someone from his dreams is going to hurt him. The client denies ever being hospitalized and that he can take his symptoms into his own hands and keep them under control. What would be the most likely diagnosis for this client? A, social anxiety disorder. B, brief psychotic disorder. C, schizophrenia form. D, schizophrenia. And when you have your answer, type one thing that you learned from this lesson today. Opening the polls. Thirty more seconds. Closing down the polls. The majority think it is C. Second place is D. Third is B. No one engaged with A. Let's break it down. 21-year-old client working with a social worker at a community mental health clinic. How long? 5 months. Hears voices and tells him to hurt his parents. They've caused him to isolate from social situations. The client reports finding it difficult to sleep and feels like someone from his dreams is going to hurt him. Never been hospitalized. He feels like he can handle everything that's in front of him. So, social anxiety disorder, 6 months or longer, and does not engage in social situations in fear that they will be judged or mess up in some way. A brief psychotic disorder, less than 30 days. Schizophrenia form, more than 1 month, yet less than 6 months. Schizophrenia, 6 months or longer. So, quick review, 21-year-old client, working with a social worker at a mental health clinic. 5 months is the length of time. Hearing voices that tell him to hurt the parents. He's isolating from social situations. He's finding it difficult to sleep and feels like someone from his dreams is going to hurt him. So we have a lot of delusions and a lot of eccentric thinking in this one. He's never been hospitalized. So we're going to rule out social anxiety disorder because he's not anxious to be in social situations. Yes, he's isolating from it, but it's not in fear with that he's going to mess up. So since it is 5 months, brief psychotic disorder is going to fall away because it was only around for a brief amount of time. So it is the pre-form of schizophrenia or is it full-on schizophrenia? We're looking at 5 months. Schizophrenia is 6 months or longer. We're kicking that one all the way out. And we are looking at schizophrenia form. So that is how we would look at that question in particular.